First of all, can everyone hear me?
Yes, you sound a little bit choppy, Sherelle. It's coming in and out.
Can you hear me now? What about now?
That's perfect. That's better.
Am I still choppy?
No, you're better now.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So thank you for your patience. We're trying something new. We're trying an interpreter's room. So we had a little bit of a little technical difficulties, but we're all good now. So thank you for your patience. And so I just want to thank all of our panelists. But before we begin, I'd like you to see a bit of a clip from a Netflix series called Living Undocumented.
Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your story, being able to experience.
Francesca, love the energy today. Climb in the lead.
Oh, Shelley, are you having technical difficulties?
Yes, I'm so sorry.
You know what? Let's move on.
Okay.
So everyone, I'm very excited that we have the author with us this evening, Marcelo Castillo, and he is going to deliver a wonderful presentation before we get started with the presentation. Mr. Castillo, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly fine. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share with us your story, the story behind the book.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and all of the planning that went into this, and just for trusting my book to be a vehicle to enter these conversations and engage with the community in such a way that is necessary, conversations that have an impact in the community as a whole. Because if one thing that I've learned is, just the level of knowledge that the general public has about some of the plights of immigrants and the undocumented community is pretty low. And so part of what I do is, bring awareness, but also, try to humanize stories that are more complicated than what we believe. I am short on time, so I wanted to just talk a little bit. I wanted to maybe first and foremost share a brief slideshow of a few pictures that I compiled of writing a book in which I had to write in the moment that it was happening. A lot of people say, to write a memoir, you have to either have lived a long time, write it in older age, and look back upon, your life, or at least give yourself the rule of thumb is like 7 years distance between the events so that you can write from a more objective perspective. But I felt like I couldn't do that. I felt like I would do myself a disservice and would lose some of the immediacy that was happening as it was happening in writing later. And I felt more like, rather than the experiences coloring how my emotions being so immediate, I felt like waiting too long would have done more of a disservice in coloring how I actually went through with that. Also because I have a terrible memory. I felt like I couldn't give myself the luxury. I didn't have the privilege to wait. And so I wrote a book that was happening very much as I was going along. In fact, after I had sold the pitch, everything with my father happened. And so I kind of had to like stop for like half a year, do all of that, and kind of regroup myself and kind of figure out, okay, what kind of book is this now? And I'm thinking about a lot of the other books that talk about a similar experience, and my insistence, my determination to not make a spectacle of my story, to not simply tell it for the scandalous, more dramatic aspects of the immigrant story, to not mythologize or make it a story, a heroic journey, because I'm a flawed individual, and I wanted to provide the nuance, the complications that are around the story of somebody growing up undocumented in the U.S. From the trailer that if you in the audience were able to catch it earlier on, somebody said I wasn't born here, but my heart is American. I truly question that. Maybe not so necessarily on the surface of my book, but how do I align myself with a country, as I do say in the book, with a country that is so inherently violent? How do I align myself with, this is part of maybe one of the questions that was going to be raised in the immigration interview, in which I had to, for a moment, act as if I could love this country and do away with the violences that this country has perpetuated against communities of color, against the Black community, against Indigenous communities, Asian Pacific Islander communities, and so for me, I'm still thinking about that answer. I want to share a quick slideshow if I can real quick. It might actually, oh yeah, iCloud Drive, it will let me. I'm also trying to sell some new technology, because my laptop is getting repaired, so I'm trying to work with like my iPad and my phone at the same time. But can you see this okay?
Yes.
So I opened the book
Yes.
with well, the first section is about when I raided my home, but the first chapter talks about my return to Mexico for the first time, the first movement titled DACA, in which I returned to Mexico for the first time, and my experiences of going over the border in the plane, being in the plane, and seeing the border below. And this is an actual picture that I took of that actual moment, in which I was flying over the border and trying to figure out, when was the moment that I crossed? Somewhere down there, somewhere that I couldn't see, somewhere where I didn't know, my grandfather is buried. And, from the sky, I wanted to feel like I was somehow distant from the border, but even in the sky, it felt like I was more close to it than anything. And this was a very surreal experience, because I was coming back to the country of my birth, to a country that I didn't really know. And so flying over the border and seeing, as you can see, there's like a straight line kind of like in the middle. There's a road towards the bottom, but there's like a straight line towards the middle. That was the border there. And I documented that experience in the book, of wanting to find out when I was in one country and when I wasn't in another, because feeling, for the majority of my life, that I didn't belong to one or the other. Was it going to feel like a turnstile, like a New York subway turnstile, in which you could click and click and click, and then finally measure when you were in one side or when you're another, because so much of the border is such a hard line. It's such a not just rhetorically divisive, but like physically divisive barrier, that I wanted to counter that argument by saying it's not just down there. It's up here. It's in the interior of the country. It's in the interior of our minds. The border followed me wherever I went. And so that was part of the reasoning behind that chapter. And I feel like I want, a lot of that chapter was written with this picture pasted pretty much above my desk. How do I switch to the next picture? Oh, there we go. And so arriving in Mexico for the first time, and seeing the house that my father had traded for a life with his family. And this is his dog that lived on the roof. A dog that ultimately we don't know what happened to when my parents had to flee. But there were remnants of the life we were trying to make in the distance between us. You can see down there the washing machine that I talked about, that I had sent him, in the hopes of making my mother's life easier. And earlier on in the book, I talk about this episode of, many times I almost died. One of them was, getting dragged on a horse, not dragged, but being a baby, pretty much an infant, and having a horse run away with me. This is a picture taken by my father. And I don't think this is the picture in which he took, in which moments later the horse started running. But as you can see, like, it happened more than once. And for my father, as with many, Latinx men, this idea of masculinity was instilled very, very early, in which, I very, very early, he bought me the symbols, and wanted to attach the symbols of masculinity to me that would ascribe value to me as a son to him, as a man to him, very early on. And so for him, he's always had this very strict image of what a man should be, or how a man should act. And it was inculcated, very early on. And so, I visited him, and I had my wife took this picture as we were waiting for a bus. I think I was actually on my way out, that we were leaving. And I still am trying to reconcile my relationship with my father, who, the entire book hinges on whether a person can change, on whether, events in a life can soften a person. My father was very abusive, psychologically, physically. And so when he was deported in 2003 and I was in high school, I was almost glad, because it meant he was no longer going to be a terror of the household. It meant we were almost free. And, that's not a narrative that you normally see. Normally, with the deportation of a parent, you see those stories of grief, of suffering, of longing for that parent. But initially, I was almost relieved that he had left. And, my whole journey through the book was to determine, because my mother was going to leave and self-deport, basically, after all of the failed attempts at trying to gain permanent status failed. I wanted to see if he was still the abusive man he was when he left, or if he had changed, and if my mother would be safe with him. And I don't know, this picture just really, I've always looked at it, and my hand is clenched. I forget what we were talking about, but even to the day, I'm still trying to figure out, and this is in our hometown, in the moments in the days leading up to my mother's departure, we felt like gatherings were bittersweet. This was my mother's birthday, I believe, and it would have been the last birthday that we had with her as a family here in the States. And this is what this is the house, I guess, that I talk about, that was strewn with, you know, that had this rustic aesthetic that that I was trying to get to know my father through, and he had never really abandoned this macho cowboy style. You know, I talk about this house as a metaphor for how he carried on with his life, how he built it with, you know, footings that were 10, 15 feet deep. And this wall here in front is a like a foot thick limestone bricks. You know, and we were trying to make the best of every situation, me, my brother, my sister. And I didn't really include them at all. You know, my sister hardly, my brother, I don't think at all. Because I wanted to keep their privacy, but it was also a book about me and my parents, my relationship with my parents, you know. And so it was really difficult. It was really a difficult time to figure out how to write this book and not feel like I'm erasing the rest of my family, but also be respecting their privacy. You know, I included this picture because, as I mentioned, oh no, I just had another event right now. These are pictures that were taken shortly after they left, and I don't know why I did this. That I was in Washington D.C. in the left, and then shortly after on the right, but I felt like I didn't want to be seen. This book and my mother's departure really took a heavy toll on me. And you know, one of the things that I think we're gonna talk about today is the long-lasting effect that deportations, that separation have on families. And you know, even as an adult, I found it difficult to cope, even though I was already independent, even though I was already, you know, I already had my own family. I felt still at such a loss of grief that my mother was leaving, even though I could still technically go see her, right? And the book ends with my son, with the birth of my son, and thinking, what is his responsibility going to be like? We have been doing this moving back and forth, this moving in almost even just in one direction, feeling like we're never actually here. And will that stop with my son? Or, you know, we've been doing this for 100 years. My great grandfather was the first one to come in our family to the US. And we're still doing the exact same thing that he was trying to do in 1916. Nothing has changed for us. It's not an easy assimilation story. You know, not even to mention the violences of assimilation that you have to like force to give up part of yourself in order to reclaim a different identity. But I'm just struck right now, like literally right now, as I see this picture, the correlations with me taking this picture in his little charro suit with a plush horse, and my dad taking my picture when I was exactly that age too, on a real horse with a hat. That's funny. I actually, you know, this is the last picture in the slide that I'll talk about, but it's just, am I also part of this same cycle? I do want to, I am breaking a lot of the, you know, toxic traits of masculinity that my father tried to instill. And I want to raise my son with an awareness of gender disparity, of racial disparity. And, you know, but nonetheless, I see my father in myself here in trying to capture this image. I don't know why I chose this image to show, but I've never made that connection until right now. I'll stop that share and maybe move forward to the panel. And I was going to read a little bit from the book, but I think I'll hold off on that in the interest of time.
Do you want to read a quick snippet that might tie everything in that you were talking about? Of course,
Yes.
we read it, but we want to hear it in your voice.
Yes, but I'm trying to find where exactly that is at, because I have exactly what I know exactly what would tie it. And I do know where it's at. It's right here. If you give me 1 second. Yes. Okay. I'm sorry.
And while he's finding his place, I just want to let everyone know, if you have a question, can you please put it in the chat, and we'll do our best to make sure that we try to get to it.
Okay, I found it.
Yay.
So I'll just read this short snippet that kind of talks about this idea of the border as something beyond what I saw down there. It's on page 29. I ventured to believe that the function of the border wasn't only to keep people out. At least that was not its long-term function. Its other purpose was to be visible, to be seen, to be carried in the imagination of migrants deep into the country, into the interior of the country, in the interior of their minds. It was a spectacle meant to be witnessed by the world, and all of its death and violence was and continues to be a form of social control. The way that kings of the past needed to behead only one petty thief in the public square to quell thousands more. The biggest threat to immigrants who succeeded in crossing was the fear that this apparatus of surveillance was always watching you, that it could come at any second, that it can come get you and change your life at any second. It was the idea that was most menacing, that infiltrated every sector of a person's life, this total and complete surveillance, an unrelenting fear that was this unrelenting fear that was most abrasive on a person's soul, that a trip to the grocery store, that taking your child to the ER, taking to the doctor, trying to file a police report if you've been hurt, could lead to disastrous consequences. On the Mexican side of the line, it stood as a symbol for those wanting to cross, announcing, "This could happen to you if you dare cross." We had all seen what happened to bodies in the desert. We knew the dangers of coyotes. I always felt like it was on my back, looming just above me, the omnipresent nature of the beast. The border didn't just exist in the Southwest, but rather everywhere. I had possessed its lesson. I knew that place wasn't somewhere I traveled to or lived in. The border had taught me that it had to be something else. I wanted to exist in a place that had no relationship to the border at large, or to immigration, or to my family, or to my status or my family's. And I'll skip to the end. I knew that it was not simply birds, trees, and dirt down there. There were ghosts, very much as real as the trees around them. There was blood down there that didn't possess the magical ability to dry, to wither away into nothing, to be forgotten. How easy it would have been to look down and see nothing but sand. How fortunate for those who couldn't, or better stated, refused to see the bodies strung like sweaters on clotheslines beneath the water in the Rio Bravo. I felt like I'd lost control of my body, like I was already dying 6 miles above the earth. There was death down there, and to some, it hardly made a shadow. It hardly made a sound. To others, it was deafening. It started to sound like hammers.
Wow. The pages that you read, that was the imagery that really captured everything for me, and gave me the feeling of exactly, I can't say exactly because I've not experienced it, but gave me the empathy of what it's like to go through what you've gone through. So thank you for sharing your voice, and more so for sharing it so candidly.
Thank you.
So, thank you. And I will introduce our panel. You will definitely get to know Mr. Castillo through the questions that we're going to ask, which is why I didn't read his bio. Most of you read the book, and then we'll get to know him through tonight's questions. So without further ado, we have our First Lady of the City of Norwalk, Lucia C. Rilling. And we have our Vice President of the Norwalk Board of Education, Diana Carpio. We have the Chair of, there's Mrs. Rilling, our First Lady, yay. And do I see Diana? And First Lady, thank you for jumping in as we had tough technical difficulties, as you so graciously do. So thank you so much. And you look beautiful. And I see Diana, my partner in crime.
Hey, Sherelle.
Hey, Diana. And our attorney and the chair of the Norwalk Board of Estimation and Taxation, Edwin Camacho.
Hi there.
And Eloisa could not be with us this evening, due to some family issues, but Eloisa, if you're out there, we love you. And we wish you could be with us. And we have Dr. Alexandra Estrella, our superintendent of Norwalk Public Schools.
Good evening, everyone.
And we have Jim Martinez, who is the director of school counseling for Norwalk Public Schools.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you all so much for your work and organization. I'm so happy that you're all with us to have this discussion. And so for a little bit of background, when Mr. Castillo writes about his green card interview, he engages in extraordinary act of empathy. Sitting across from a smiling US official, he imagines what she tells her friends and family about her work. She didn't look like, and Alex, I'm gonna have you help me, La Migra? La Migra? Am I pronouncing it right with the right accent?
La
It's La
migra.
Migra.
La
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 migra.
Migra.
Migra. Ed, are you showing off? Say it again.
No, just migra.
La
In
migra.
Spanish, the vowels are I, E, O, U, so I is E, so migra.
Migra.
La Migra. Okay. She didn't talk how I imagined La Migra would talk, but did I ever imagine La Migra as having a body, as having a mouth? Did I ever think it could be reduced to one person sitting behind a desk in front of me? At the end of the interview, he and Ruby stand to leave. The official welcomes him to America, as if forgetting that he'd been in the country already for 2 years. So when we think about people who immigrate to America, how do we think of their experience? Do we really empathize with their lived experiences to accomplish the American dream, or do we rely on media stereotypes? So I'm gonna have someone, one of you, do you want to tackle that question? What do you think? Do we really empathize, or do we think stereotypically?
Can I just chime in quickly?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that depends on your upbringing. I think that it depends on your actual life circumstances.
Yes.
And was somebody trying to say something a second ago?
Sounded like someone was agreeing with you.
Right. I think, it's so real, the things that happen and the things that we live and experience as children. It's so true. Everything starts at home. And from there, we can grow up, and it comes a point where, depending on our experiences in life, in school, as we go into adolescence, we then begin to form perhaps some different ideas, but we evolve and Really, I think that comes from your childhood, what gets presented to you naturally.
Mhm.
If I could, I know I've already talked so much, but if I could jump in just to mention one thing, because I've been thinking about this recently, about the second step in this question that I think would benefit to being addressed is the first step is empathy. The next step is action. And so do we want, are we interested in empathy so that we no longer have to look at the problem? Or are we interested in empathy as a starting point so that we can resolve the problem? Is the problem that we see Black bodies at the border being whipped by Border Patrol on horses? Is it the problem that we see it? Or is it the problem that is happening? And the solution by DHS recently is, okay, we'll get rid of the horses, don't worry, as if that was the problem. Optics of that is what was most dangerous to them. And so, you know, empathy, I'm seeing it as like the first step. And so what were the second step then enact? I think we're all here doing that second step of that, enacting that second movement of action.
Anyone else?
Well, okay. So for me, empathy came from seeing, experiencing, what my family went through. But as Mr. Castillo said, my house was a house of action. I grew up in a home where the kitchen table always was full with people that needed help with applications, needed help with letters, needed help with translation. I learned at a very young age to help and understand. Well, not really understand, because I was young and I didn't really understand why someone couldn't just come in and out of this country, why they were afraid to go to work, why they were getting picked up and being treated like criminals. And as I got older and I experienced what my father did, what my mother did for others, my dad was definitely the head of it all and helping others. My mother was also helping, but in a different way, setting people up if they needed apartments, if they needed a home. She was the one that always found those places, found the material items. Dad was the one that was the written word. His spoken English was not a good one, but his written English was impeccable. I mean, he would write letters for immigration. In turn, as I got older, I was the one that would go to these appointments and be the translator when they were going to meetings or meeting with an attorney and things like that. So for me, my empathy came from that experience, seeing that firsthand coming through my home. Now I see it in social media, in the news and everything. But I see the ugly side of it now too, where before I only saw I say the ugly side because people do not understand. People do not see the bigger picture. People just point fingers and say, people that immigrants are illegal, are bad people, shouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm.
But I grew up in a household where we needed to help. Everybody deserved, their dreams. So for me, it's a little bit of both, I guess.
Sherelle, would you mind repeating the question again? Because I don't, I'm sorry, I spaced out on the first part of that question.
So when we think of people that immigrate to America, how do we think of their experience? Do we really empathize with their lived experience to accomplish the American dream, or do we rely on media stereotypes?
I see. I think that, in our country, maybe this is true in other countries, other cultures, but we don't see ourselves in other people as often as we should. And so it's really, and particularly the way that the that that, you know, things are couched currently, it's us and then there's them. And we see the immigrant experience, at least not me, but I think the culture at large sees the immigrant experience as them, as their issue, but they don't see themselves in it. And so they can, you know, they can accept, you know, images of people being, you know, beaten at the border, or, you know, horses doing what they do, or just by virtue of just stopping them from trying to come into this country and trying to contribute to this country. We see that as an act of, you know, invasion, as something that is, you know, we don't see ourselves in that experience. And so I think that a lot of what this book does, and books like it and these types of forums can do, at least potentially, is to, for those who are willing to take the time and listen, I think people, if they care to look, can see themselves in the plight of immigrants, can see themselves in other people. We don't do that in this country. Our culture is not that way. And once again, it may be true in other countries as well, but I think that's the problem. The problem is that it's not that we lack empathy, but we don't really nurture empathy, I think, as a culture.
Oh, put.
I
There's a-
agree. I agree with that, Ed. And if I may say, what it comes down to is awareness, education, the humanizing
Mhm.
of this population. Yeah.
One thing that also comes to mind is this idea from this artist, Julio Salgado, who says, I'm tired of trying to prove that I am exceptional in order for you to consider me worthy. So I'm paraphrasing, it's something along those lines. But this idea that, you know, when you say media stereotypes, I'm thinking of like the media stereotype that we have of like this dreamer who is an exceptional individual who, you know, who got into a Ivy League school, who is in med school and facing all this adversity. But our empathy, you know, should extend to the person who doesn't have that experience, and granting people value and warranting that empathy, even if they didn't go to school, even if all they do is work in the fields, work in meat packing plants, work in restaurants, even if perhaps they have unrelated, you know, I'm going through my parents' asylum cases, and my father had to serve time in jail for not being able to pay off parking tickets. So in lieu of paying, because he couldn't pay, he decided to serve 1 week in jail. And so that shows up on his record when he does his biometrics. And so that like cements him as like, you know, you're in the system, you have a rap sheet, you have a record, you've been in jail. And so it's made things incredibly difficult. And so that's all to say that not everybody fits this idea of you know, what I've been able to do, of go to college, go to grad school, publish books and all this and that. That our empathy should also extend to people who don't fit that very neat definition of an immigrant.
So, Alex, I'm sorry.
I was the one that like posed this question, and it was interesting because a lot of the things that Marcelo, you started talking about in terms of that experience on the plane was one of the quotes that I wanted to elevate in the conversation. But also in the text, you also talked about when I came undocumented to the US, I crossed into a hold of invisibility. And I'm gonna skip some of it, and then you go into, it was my skin, my dark hair, my cheekbones that I wore would give me away. And I'm elevating that quote in terms of the piece around empathy, because a lot of times, especially, and I'm going to use the school perspective, when we're talking about our students and we engage in a very deficit-oriented conversation about what they don't have and not really cherish the experience that they do bring to the table, and how those lived experiences bring so much value in who they are and how they've been shaped to be, but also not really empathizing and understanding the trauma of that undocumented immigrant process that they're going through, whether it is the uncertainty of not knowing when they wake up tomorrow, where the people that they love will stand and will be, and the internal dilemma and trauma that creates for individuals. And yet they're still waking up every morning, moving forward and trying to make the best of themselves. And like Marcelo, you articulated, people might perceive these individuals as common because they're not portraying the Ivy League or big out of the box. And I'm going to say out of the box because it's not the way that most people will perceive or expect either undocumented or most immigrants to follow a trajectory. And how do you change that narrative and how to engage in those conversations, particularly when we're talking about our children and their families? Because a lot of times people talk about lack of engagement, lack of parent involvement, but they fail to empathize what their current lived experience are and the fears that they might have in engaging with an institution that might, in their mind, whether true perception or not, might take away what they've worked so hard to accomplish.
If I can add a couple of things that have already been said. When we were planning for this conversation, we talked about, we had included the conversation about how timely it was that we were going to have this discussion, this panel discussion during Hispanic Heritage Month. And I don't recall exactly who said it on this call. It might have been you, Ed, who talked about the empathy piece and how forums like this really help us move forward in the empathy piece. But I think about, Marcelo, the gift of you and the gift that you have given us with your experience. There were times when reading your book, I would have to put it down just to kind of reflect and really try to feel as much as I could what you felt. And what was said about, what was indicated about how we are raised is a powerful point to make. It's just becoming so much more challenging now with the media and with the social media piece that didn't exist years ago. And that we're even having this conversation, that we even have to even question whether or not we really empathize with the lived experience versus, to achieve the American dream versus, relying on the stereotypes. Tells us how much your sharing of this book to us, to the world, is needed. So when I think of historical, if, for example, we celebrate in Hispanic Heritage Month, not only cultures, but we celebrate historical figures. And I consider someone like yourself a Hispanic historical figure because you provide a perspective to us that otherwise we would not be able to receive.
Very well put. And I also remember, Jim, when you were writing your thoughts about the book, I could really feel how much you were feeling the book when you talked about how eloquently he put these experiences.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, I could really feel that you were really feeling the book. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, Mr. Castillo talked a little bit about like long-term effects on children. So tonight we have an attorney, we have a superintendent of schools, we have the head of school counseling, as well as the author. We have Diana, whose home was open to everyone. And we have our first lady, who's the first lady of a very multicultural city. And so, everybody sort of has their own experiences, no matter what culture you are. So the next question will be, what is the long-term effect of our children who grow up in fear of losing their family?
May I?
You may.
This is kind of something it's reflective of my life. Anything that has to do with mental health has been something that is very personal to me and very, very passionate for me. And this book, this book has been, in addition to the inspiration, it's been an education. The long-term effects of families that experience separation in this manner, I mean, date back to research that I think that has been done even after World War II. When families were separated for war, all the trauma and all the disruption and the stress on the psyche and physiologically is aligned with that of what goes on during a war. The faces that we see each and every day in Norwalk Public Schools, there are stories in those expressions and in those minds that we will never know, but that we can only but just remotely imagine. And I've always said, even when I was when I was a principal, I always said that if we can't address, if we can't connect in every which way we can with the youth, particularly our immigrant population, in the best way we can, we only have one shot at it. And when we miss that opportunity, we never get it again. So the long-term effects are, in all the research you want to read, it says that it goes into adulthood, and even beyond, even if there's, and I think Marcelo he's the expert on this, he can speak on this even more than I can, but even if there's reunification, it does not mean that all that trauma has been resolved. Not to mention the impact, the long-term effects it has on American children who remain here in this country and whose family members have been deported. So it's a dramatic, to say the least, it's a dramatic impact on socialism, on social emotional effects, psychological effects, physiological effects, and it's bona fide. It's post-traumatic stress that we have to acknowledge as an education community. We have to build even more resources. We have so many talented people in our district, in our community. We have community partners, who are willing to be there for kids 24/7, but it's just not enough. The awareness has to continue to be raised, and this conversation can support that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jim.
And I think sometimes people don't realize the trauma unless they connect to someone that has experienced the trauma and the magnitude of what that looks like. In the roles that I've played as a superintendent, as a principal, as a teacher, the conversations that I've had with children and families about the lived experience of having someone they love, who they rely on, are connected to, and are valuable entities within either a child's or that family unit's life scars that family for life. I feel like in many perspectives, just listening to the conversation, I've been traumatized. Just thinking about what that would mean in the context of my own lived experience. And I never forget a student that I had, I remember the week where she was having so much unrest. And her unrest was because her brothers were crossing the border. And every second that passed by, the anxiety and the complexity of her behavior elevated as a result of it. And if she didn't have people that really connected with her to have those conversations, the assumption was going to be that she was a troubled child, right? Not that she was going through an experience that many adults couldn't handle. And having her speak to those experiences, to that experience, and what that meant for her and her family was a chilling experience for me and those that were supporting her. So I think that when we talk about empathy and building understanding and like what are the long-term effects, you really have to take a moment and educate yourself if you haven't had the opportunity to engage in dialogue with somebody that has had that lived experience, to really have some level of context and putting yourself in the shoes of these children and families and say, what would I do? How would I feel? And I'm pretty sure the responses to your question would yield a lot of trauma and a lot of insecurity. Going back to the text, I think Marcelo kind of created so much imagery about that moment when DACA came to his house and what that meant for him from that point forward around feeling safe, right? That didn't exist anymore in his life. And think about how many children experience that. You know, having a trip in school and you want to go as a child, but then what's going to happen if the bus is stopped? What could happen to me? Parents coming to you and having those conversations. These are the things that a lot of people don't sit down and think about, but this is the daily lived experience of many people. And if that's your lived experience, how would that make you feel over time? And I think that will help you connect to what the trauma looks like for children and families.
And it seems on a very practical level, Marcelo, that you write about your alcohol abuse or consumption, your Prozac, you know, your depression or anxiety or whatever. And so I think you are, how much of that in your mind was you sort of self-medicating, at least with alcohol, and then how much of the Prozac is, or your depression is a function of the anxiety that of the process? Is this something that you relate in any way to what you and your family have experienced?
Right. Thank you for that question. And I always do purposefully bring up issues of mental health because it isn't something that isn't talked about as much, and something that is so fundamentally central to the experience of immigrant communities that we would be remiss to not, you know, talk about the different ways that people have to cope, you know, and that lead to these long-term behaviors that can't be fixed, even with reunification, even with adjustment of status, even with a veil of security that we might feel, you know, being granted things like DACA that supposedly are protections from deportations. But, you know, as is mentioned right now, you know, there are almost what might seem as irrational behaviors by somebody on the outside might seem irrational, but to somebody going through them, as was mentioned about the student whose brothers were crossing the border, to be told by someone that they are undocumented, to be told by somebody that their brothers are crossing the border at that moment is a great trust. Is a great trust that that isn't easily given to just anybody. My mother always said, never tell anyone, no matter what. And so what that leads to then is having to justify your behaviors of coping mechanisms, having to find rationales to explain why you behave, in a certain way. And for me, I think about this often because would I have experienced the kinds of mental health issues had I not been exposed to those traumatic events? And I think it's twofold. It is probably, and I do also want to talk about intergenerational trauma that gets inherited from generation to generation over things that we have nothing to do with, but yet are very much part of our DNA, that turn on those genes of anxiety, that turn on, we might all have those genes or a lot of us might already have those genes that are more inclined towards being manifested as anxiety, as depression, as other issues, but they might not get triggered. They might not get initiated and turned on. And so, yes, it's part of, your biology, but it's also the environment. So for me, I didn't have access to a doctor. So the undocumented issue is also a health issue. It's not just an issue of policy and immigration. I didn't have access to a dentist. I didn't have access to mental health experts. And I felt like I couldn't go to my school counselors because I was told not to tell anybody. And so for me, even at a young age, I started drinking at 15. And it was later on that once I got access to a doctor through grad school, because grad school came with health benefits, abusing then the prescription medications that were granted to me in order to just superficially solve what was a much deeper problem. And I'm reminded of something that like my mother-in-law is going through right now. My mother-in-law, and even I don't write about her in my book, but she's in a very good place. She's in a financially stable situation. She has adjusted her citizenship. She has naturalized to become a citizenship. Her daughters are in, very good shape. Yet she has had like 3 full-blown panic attacks. She has fainted. She has gone to experts, and she says, "Why? I don't have any reason to be nervous, to be anxious, to be going through this." And for me, it's because when she was raising her children, when they were going through these experiences, she couldn't afford to cope. Her body wouldn't allow her to go through the mental processes of coping or of finding other way, because survival came first. And so now that your body has kind of loosened up, now your body says, okay, now it's time to cope. Now it's time to address these things that we have suppressed for so many years. And so people like my mother, people who are much older and now are in a better circumstance, that doesn't mean that suddenly their problems have gone away. It might actually mean that they're getting worse because now they have the privilege of staying home, of not having to work, of a modicum of protection that allows them the time to reflect, contemplate, and really take in the magnitude of the perils that they went through crossing the border, the dangers that they went through being a woman and working in a male dominated field like labor, field labor, any other kind of labor, and you know, going through real threats of sexual abuse, which we know happens in predominantly immigrant heavy labor industries.
No, in some ways, the flight or fight thing that happens in us, when it seems to me that your mother-in-law, when she was, you know, younger, raising a family, you know, dealing with all of the issues that she had to deal with, you know, as an immigrant mother, she was in a fight mode, and now, and I think her body's probably used to that, and I think now that she's no longer in that situation, it must be a little unnerving to still be in a fight mode and not have anything around you that's precipitating that anxiety, or that feeling is no longer useful. Now it's actually hurting you. So,
Exactly.
but those are the long-term consequences of that experience that you know, that younger kids, and yourself included, aren't going to probably fully know until years to come, I think. And that's something to be mindful about.
Mhm. I'd like to piggyback on something that Marcelo said. It reminded me of what Dad would used to always tell us at home. Lo que se dice en la casa no sale de esta casa. That means what is said in our home does not leave our home. And there were so many times, so many conversations that I would go to school, I would go to work. I wasn't allowed to have those conversations with anyone. But at the same time, like you said, who do you trust? Who can you talk to? Who would be there for you, and who wouldn't turn someone in? Just that in general. I wasn't allowed to speak Spanish in public. I wasn't allowed to do certain things in public because of the fear of things, of the fear of bringing, you know, ICE to your home, to your job. I mean, even now they say children are safe at school. Nobody's going to walk into the school and take that child out of there. With me volunteering and doing so many different events, meeting families, there are so many families out there that have that other person, maybe not a best friend, maybe not, you know, someone close, but that one person that they've had to have a conversation and say, if I ever get picked up, promise me that my child will be okay. Promise me that you're going to go to the school and pick up my child. They're born here, they're legal here, but I'm not. So promise me that you are going to pick them up and they're going to be okay. I mean, what kind of conversation is that you have to trust someone that could be a total stranger to you because of their status in this country, because you want better for your child? And then let's bring that all full circle to now during COVID. With volunteering with Norwalk Mutual Aid, the number of families that could not collect unemployment because of their status and being paid under the table, the number of children that were going hungry. My son went to drop off food with me one day, and he saw someone that he knew from high school. We got into the car, and he actually had a breakdown and he cried. And I said to him, one, we will not discuss this in public to anybody because that's very private. And two, not everybody has what we have. And three, a child that's hungry, a child that's worried, a child that's sick will never get the education that they need. And those are all things that we have to think about and discuss. And that was a lot of the reason why I ran for the Board of Education, communication and children. And Marcelo, your book brought out sadness, anger, memories, a little bit of everything. But now here we are having this conversation because of your book.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you, everyone. So the next question is going to have you all draw on your own personal experiences, which you've done, but maybe in a deeper way, and in a way that empathizes and relates with Mr. Castillo. So what is the one real life experience that you remember while reading this book, and how did you connect with Mr. Castillo? And I think some of you have already shared your experiences and how you've connected, but if you have anything else that you want to add, specifically how you connect with him.
I
mean,
think.
what was,
Oh, go ahead.
no, go on, doctor.
No, go ahead.
No, I just think that the thing that I connected, that sort of resonated the most with me, is the sense that you're here, you're in this country, but you're not really part of this country, but you're not really part of the other country. Let's say I'm a Puerto Rican. My parents were both born in Puerto Rico. They never had any family there. They were both orphans, so that our family in New York was the beginning of our family. But we never went to Puerto Rico like a lot of my peers whose parents were from Puerto Rico. And so what resonated with me was that this sense of not really belonging here, but not really belonging anywhere else. So this notion, and I think, Marcelo, you talked about when you went back to Mexico, I can't remember if when you went back originally, you felt that somehow you belonged there, or you didn't quite belong there either. Was that, I'm not sure what the realization was, but it was something like that. And I sort of, I felt for a very long time that I was never really fully part of any one place. And so it was a challenge for me to figure out where I belong in this planet, or in this space I'm occupying at the moment, because it was really not based on a nationality so much as for me. And I was raised in Harlem too. So I was a sort of a conglomeration of a Latino culture, the Black culture, the greater culture that didn't, and we didn't really, these cultures didn't mix or blend easily. So it made that sense of alienation or not belonging more acute.
I think it was both, to answer your question. It was both kind of realizing something that I belong to, returning, but also not feeling like I belong to either. And there's a saying, ni de aquí ni de allá, neither of here nor of there. And I've always said this when I'm asked, how do I feel about a certain country? Whether that's my country of birth or the country that I've immigrated to, is that my affiliation isn't necessarily to nations or institutions, but my affiliations and commitments are to family, chosen or otherwise, and community. And so that's where my commitments, my investments are, because I didn't want to, set up this return to my home country on a pedestal that it was perfect. Mexico, enacts probably more violence on Central American migrants than the U.S., particularly on its southern border. And so it's much larger than that. But yeah, just to like address that.
I think for me is the irony. I think when you, Marcelo, spoke about historical trauma, and I thought about the moment when my grandmother died. The reason why I wasn't able to see her travel was because I didn't have a passport, because my mother ingrained in all of us that you don't allow your passport to expire. So 6 months before, now this is a new thing with COVID, but prior to that, 6 months before my passport being expired, I was already trying to renew my passport because it had been ingrained in me that your documents had to be up to date. And I think a lot of it stems from the historical trauma that my family dealt with those that were undocumented, and the importance of having these papers that kind of define your existence. And also dealing with what Ed was talking about, where in America, I'm not American enough. And in Dominican Republic, where my parents are from, I'm not Dominican enough. And feeling that there's no right place to be because you're never enough of the thing that people perceive you needing to be able to be seen as a person of that place. Yeah, I was born in America. I can say that I'm American. Yeah, saying that comes with a lot of hesitation because people look at me like I'm crazy. And people never assume that I'm American. They first assume that I came here from somewhere else. And when I correct that fact, people seem shocked. But I feel like you've experienced trauma and I can never imagine what it is to be in your space. But having the lived experience of having those conversations with people in my family and seeing people that have been forced to separate in that process creates even a level of anxiety for somebody that has been documented all their life, but has been surrounded by the experience and what that means. And then even in this previous governmental experience, when conversations were taking place about, even if you were born in America and they can like, in America, you could be potentially deported. I was like, what is going on, right? So that internal trauma and anxiety that you ingest because of the lived experience of people that you love, plus all of that historical trauma, also play a toll. So in thinking about your child and his generation and my children and the things that they're going to experience, I don't know how many generations it's going to take for people to really, people that have had some element of the experience to really cope with that experience in different ways.
Yeah,
Well,
some of those behaviors never go away, as I talk about in the book. Like, I still drive with one eye on the speedometer to make sure that I'm going neither too fast, neither too slow, so as to not draw attention. When I travel, I have a photocopy of all of my documents at hand, plus a digital copy. And so these are things that, like you say, get ingrained even to the next generations of this paranoia almost that that grows. Of I have everything at hand ready here in like a portfolio, and sometimes I've had it like next to my door when there was fires here nearby, like ready, because yes, I could lose my bed, my couches, my laptop, but I couldn't lose my documents.
And my mother ingrained that to us. We would have to have our documents in a particular place that we knew if there was a fire. My mother had that same thing. It's just crazy. Whatever you do, the first thing you take is that blue envelope.
Yeah.
Where your existence is.
Yeah.
And even people telling you like, oh, you're going there, make sure you take your papers. I'm like, are you serious? You just said that? Or you're just having this conversation right now? And people don't realize the anxiety that yields for me as a person, or for anyone, that you have to even to move from one state or one county because of whatever perceptions people might have or perceived perception exists of that place, that you are in danger and that you're not safe.
And it's interesting that when you, Marcelo, when you took the other documents you had of all the other identities, I suppose, that you had previously, and you put them in bleach and made them into, made them disappear. But of course, they didn't disappear in your mind because you experienced those. It's kind of ironic that those were the same thing that you have now, but they were just documents that are no longer useful, but they were as important in many ways as the ones that you currently have.
Mm-hmm.
But those, serve no purpose. But and the fact that they were able to disappear like that makes it. It's interesting to think about that. Really, we aren't documents. That's really a construct, whether we're American or not. It's the whole thing is a construct that we can easily do away with and still be and still be here and who we are.
Right. Yeah. For being quote unquote undocumented, the undocumented are one of the most documented people, because of our obsession with documents. My mother has kept before she self-deported, she kept, as I write in the book, every single rent receipt, PG&E receipt to prove that she's been here for as long as she has. Child drawing. I mean, she isn't a hoarder, but she wanted to document her existence as a form of validity that wasn't granted to her by the state.
Hmm.
When the Immigration Reform and Control Act of, I think, 1986 came into being, I think there was some way to become a resident, I guess, if you had been here for X number of years and can prove it. So I think maybe, that was 10 years or maybe more, but I think that became very important for that reason, because that was used as a measuring thing in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It never ceases to amaze me how the human condition struggles so much with belonging, because this whole conversation we're having right now about the documentation and documents, it's about belonging. And there's a part of your book, Marcel, that you wrote something about your mom dreaming that she was missing a shoe. And, she would dream of a pile of shoes, but none of them were hers. That struck me quite a bit, because while I didn't experience, I'm Puerto Rican, like I said to one meeting we had, a New Yorican, born and raised in New York. My parents are Puerto Rico. They're not immigrants, obviously. Puerto Rico is, American, but just that whole sense of belonging, not knowing what Dr. Estrella said is so true. I'm not American enough in Puerto Rico, but I'm not Puerto Rican enough in New York or in the United States. So.
Hmm. So I'm going to move this on to ask all of you, have immigration issues gotten better or worse? The dog has an answer.
It seems to me that they've, I wouldn't say they've gotten worse, but they've stayed the same, equally bad throughout. I mean, I have parents coming to me now wanting me to write, to prepare powers of attorney or temporary custodial agreements in the event they get deported, that someone will keep their children who are born here. I think the avenue to becoming becoming undocumented is as difficult as it has been in my experience. I don't do immigration law, but if you cross the border, you don't come here with a visa and overstay your visa, it is virtually impossible to adjust your status, I guess is what they call it. And so I think, with the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, that was the last time that we had any kind of way to adjust the status of people who have been here for a very long time, who really have very little in Mexico or in Argentina, whatever country they're from. They don't really have any family there, but they cannot adjust their status. And so, so I think that something has to give, but that I think it's as difficult as it has been in a very long time to be here and not, have documentation, so to speak, not be a resident or not be on, be on track to become a resident.
I'm going to go a little off the cuff and just ask this question. Do you think the answer is immigration reform in the United States or fixing some of the issues from which people are fleeing in other countries?
I mean, I personally think it's a little bit of both. It's a lot of both, actually, because people are coming here enduring all kinds of hazards, and then the indignity of not belonging here and constantly being afraid and being, you know, having to be invisible for a reason. And our policies abroad, economic policies abroad, particularly in Latin America, have had a lot to do with why the situation is what it is. Obviously, there's a blame to go around, but I think that we can't fix one problem without fixing the other, because the fixes are going to be temporary. But we definitely need to address our immigration laws that favor, some countries over others. And we need to do the whole thing. It's I don't think there's it's one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's both. I was in a flight once, and in the Sky News magazine on like Delta, there was an ad that said if you invest $500,000 in the U.S., you get your residency, and that's a immigration policy that was passed for economic stimulus into the U.S. economy that foreign nationals can invest. And so Ivanka and Trump was literally selling green cards as in PowerPoint presentations in China, and saying, for $500,000 you can actually get your residency, but that's to a very select few. In a way, I think it's just gotten more visible. There are things that didn't exist before, like the Office of Denaturalization, that never existed before, that is going back and reviewing cases of naturalization and seeing if there was anything nefarious that they can find in them to reverse somebody who's been a naturalized citizen for 30 years. And that is the constitutional grounds for that are even questionable. But there's things like Remain in Mexico program that do not allow people to legally ask for asylum at the border and thus have to wait in Mexico, which I think was just repealed by a federal judge. I can't remember, but it goes back to this idea of do we want to no longer look at the problem, or do we want the problem to be resolved? And part of that has to do with how visible is immigration right now versus how visible was it before? Is it more of a problem? Have police murders risen, or have they just been more well documented? Right.
It's a good point, because it really was, we're perceiving it as a problem, but I think there's always been this flow back and forth, because there's a supply of relatively inexpensive labor, people willing to work long hours for a little pay. So we've benefited from that. Certain industries in this country have, and I think it's only now a problem because of one political party feels that it's important to separate people, to divide people. It's always been someone, it's always been those, we need to be afraid of these people. So I think, which is not to diminish the issue or that there is a problem, but it's not new. I think that we've always had this back and forth. We're now perceiving it as the borders being invaded, because that's the narrative that certain people, certain leaders want us to have, because it makes people afraid and it makes them vote, the way that they want to vote. But I think there's always been this a back and forth, this flow, and it's been mutually beneficial, I guess, to some extent. And it's not, so I don't think it's a new thing, and I don't know that it's really a problem. Obviously, it's a problem if you're here and you're constantly, having to hide or to be invisible, and there's this constant fear of a deportation. But I think that it seems to me, at least, that we're focusing on that, and so people have a deeper or heightened sense that they need to be afraid. But I think that we've had this exchange of back and forth for a very long time. I don't think of it as a problem in that sense.
There are a couple of, Alex, you can go ahead. I just want to get to some of the things in the chat as well.
I was just going to say that I agree with Ed. I think the reason why people are talking more about it is because it's been publicized more now than it has in the past. I think the digital awareness that has developed in the past few years because of technology advancements has facilitated the narrative and in some cases bastardized what really is happening because people want to portray a story versus the whole scope of what's really happening. And in many cases criminalizing undocumented individuals in this country because the narrative of all the work and labor and in some cases like the modern slaves in many perspectives, underpaid individuals that have been utilized by many is unspoken of. And even using the word illegal immigrant has like such a negative context in as we have the conversations of how to support and rethink how we engage in this process. I think Ed said it well. It's a process of, it takes two areas of development to further engage in this conversation, is what's happening in their countries and how we improve that, and what's happening in ours and how do we do better. Because undocumented individuals have been taken advantage in so many ways, and I don't think those stories are spoken of. Underpaid, not well treated, and all of the above. And when you hear many times in social media what some want to portray, it's a very different narrative that criminalizes individuals and inhibit the ability of having the full context of why people come here and what they want to do for America per se. That is very different than many of the stories that I've heard.
So Alex, when you were speaking, I was thinking about something my daughter and I were watching. I don't remember what it was, but I just remember there was an undocumented immigrant, I believe, working in a slaughterhouse, and he had chopped his finger. But the employer, he had no insurance, he had nothing, and he had to just keep working. And that imagery just stayed in my mind. So when you said, about how they're taken advantage of, that just brought back to memory the video that we were watching.
Yeah, there was a documentary. I don't remember the exact name, but America Without Mexican. I can't remember the name of the documentary, but it was very telling. It speaks some important truths to what's happening in this country and some of the things that we have to work on all levels.
So I'll get to the chat. Nancy Meany, who is the vice president of Open Doors Shelter and who does a phenomenal job working tirelessly, for people so that they would have their dignity as they're temporarily displaced. So Nancy says, one of the quotes from the book that really hit me was, "Being undocumented said nothing about me or my identity, but it did inform a lot of my behaviors." And she said, thank you for that insight. And Don Burr, who is Norwalk Public Schools' very own and a lifelong Norwalker with, going back many generations. Don says, the thing that comes to mind here for me, the day after an election about 5 years ago, the conversations among some students who were relating to each other and the other educators in the room. They were talking about the real conversations at their dinner tables the night before, and they were considering what they could take with them. And hold on, Dawn. 1 second, I'm sorry.
And what would be left behind?
Thank you, Dawn. I lost my place clicking on something. Hold on. Okay, the night before, yep, and they were considering what they could take with them and what would be left behind. I am certain some scales fell off from my eyes that day. And Marilyn Marino says, my heart breaks over the immigration issue, and Marcelo's book touched me deeply. In fact, 4 years of hearing Build the Wall was so upsetting, and I'm not an immigrant. I know that Marcelo's story is happening in many homes in Norwalk. So I'm just scrolling down. Many homes in Norwalk tonight as we sit here having this discussion. You spoke of action. What can I, a non-Spanish speaking resident, do on a local level? What action can I take to help? I even took Spanish and continuing ed at NCC so I could try to help families, but it was so hard. No hablo. Though I continue to try to learn, but what can I do? John East wrote, thank you, Mr. Castillo, for sharing your story. And let's see, Azra, and I don't want to mess up the last name, Asadudin. Identity is complex. Immigrant parents from the Indian subcontinent have a term for their American kids, ABCD, which means American born, confused, Desi. Desi means folks from the subcontinent. And she goes on to say, average people like myself have no clue about the nuts and bolts of what it takes to immigrate from various countries. Media just pushes buttons, but does not inform. Mr. Burr, again, indentured servitude, work under the table and paid pennies on the dollar for a day's work. And Reverend Jeffrey Ingram, who is the pastor of, I'm saying Grace, Calvary Baptist Church here in Norwalk, wrote, shirtless, can you allow the audience to chime in? Oh, I don't know what that was, but anyway, they wanted the audience to chime in. So it looks like your book is touching quite a few people. So we have some questions. And feel free, anyone else who wants to, chime in the chat, feel free to continue. But we do have some questions directly for you, Mr. Castillo. And two of these come from Luis Ayala, who is a librarian at Norwalk Public Library. I don't know if he's still with us, but Luis, thank you for your involvement in the organization of this program as well. So Luis wrote, if I remember correctly, in an effort to not stand out, be as invisible as possible, you focused on learning the English language to the best of your ability. As you were focusing on gaining command of the English language for defensive purposes, it is interesting that you would use language as an offensive tool in your adulthood. Poetry, writing, and joining undocumented poets. Can you talk a little about that journey?
Sure. I can just say that having, as I know might be a shared experience either among any of the panelists or the audience is that I had to be I had to grow up very fast. I had to be a translator very fast. I had to know medical terms at a very young age to translate for my mother, for my father, for conversations that I didn't want to be a part of, but had to nonetheless, with the mechanic, with housing authorities, so on and so forth. And as Diana, I believe was talking about like filling out forms and translating. This was part of my job, and so language was very important. I would say I would put it on a defensive, offensive kind of terminology, but more so on a survival slash active categories, because it was necessary for survival to master a language, not only to get by. And I know many people who have gotten by without knowing any English. My mother worked for 3 decades without knowing English. She's starting to learn, and she's actually translating the book in Spanish, which we will which my agent will be pitching soon, and she's going to see all of the advanced royalties for her Spanish translation. So I told her, this is your project. She is about halfway done with it, and she is a magnificent translator. I never knew that my mother, had that gift of language, and that's probably where it came from. She was just never given the opportunity. But to address the question, I think rather than thinking of it as an offensive tool, I used it to my benefit. I used it as a tool of action. Each of us here, Dr. Estrella, James Martinez, Ed, Cheryl, everybody here has our own role in approaching, in deconstructing, humanizing, and addressing the concerns, the worries, the plights of immigrants. My role has been one of author. I wouldn't be a good lawyer. I miss a lot of details. So, that's why I have lawyers to do that for me, because they are the ones advocating in law. They're the ones who are litigating in courts. There are doctors who are approaching their practice from a particular kind of empathy in mind, that they know the fears that families might come. There's educators here. The Norwalk Library is doing this service. So I think for me, language was a mode of action, but that action takes on its own unique form of each individual here. Your advocacy looks different, but is nonetheless, it's not any less valid or important. I think each of us are providing an integral part towards a solution.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you for that. And someone wrote, can you link any videos to share with middle and high grade students to help them relate? Shelley, can you, the video that we were going to show, can you post that in the chat, as well as the initial trailer?
Mm-hmm. 2 of them, right?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you. So,
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Castillo, the next question is, your mom is such an important part of your life. You wrote, I didn't want her to be undocumented anymore. I wanted her to feel like she belonged in the country in which she lived when she was going back to Mexico. But things end with her having to come back to the US. If you don't mind, can you share how your mom is doing today, aside from translating your book?
I'm happy to report that she is doing fantastic. The time she has been here since they had to flee because of the kidnapping, she has spent endless hours at our local public library through their literacy program, and has learned English. She has computer literacy programs too at the library, has learned how to navigate a computer, has learned how to send emails, and types now at like 40 to 50 words what is it, per minute,
Mhm.
at like 99% accuracy. So she is now translating my book. She, she doesn't work. Her children, all of us, we take care of her bills, and she comes over. She was just here. I was actually going to ask her if she wanted to do a cameo. Um, she
Is she
just went
still
back.
here?
She just went back home, and she only lives a couple blocks away from me.
Oh,
So she comes in, she comes here, and while I do work here in my office, she takes care of my son, who is 3, who you saw in the opening slideshow. He's gonna be 4 now, but she's thriving. She's really finding ways to better herself, to really find ways of just growing. She loves gardening. She's gardening. She's reading a bunch of books that I'm giving to her. Our library has closed because of renovations, because of COVID, and so this still hasn't opened. But she volunteers there, restacking books, and so yeah, she's doing really well. I
sounds
think
like a wonderful lady.
she is.
Sounds like it. Well, sorry we missed her. You could have interrupted it and let her have a cameo.
Yeah, and I was, but I didn't realize. My wife just came home and gave her a ride back home.
Maybe next time. And so we have a 2-part question for you. Another, how and at what time in your life did you decide to teach poetry to incarcerated youth? And why there and not a traditional institute?
Well, that happened rather recently, for a couple of reasons. I mean, I do teach at traditional institutes. I teach at St. Mary's College of California in their MFA program. But I also am the poet laureate for the county in which I live, Yuba and Sutter counties.
Good for you.
And part of that is part of my goal as being the poet laureate. I was actually doing this before I was a poet laureate. I was only named the poet laureate last year, but before I took on that role, I decided that my advocacy could not be simply on a national level, because I would travel to everywhere: Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Seattle, even smaller towns. Last year, smaller towns in Oklahoma, Indiana, because I separated my personal life from my life of advocacy, because that was safer. Because I could talk about my undocumented status. I could talk about my family in Chicago because my family wasn't in Chicago, right? And so it felt safer to have that distance, and I didn't want to combine my personal life with my professional life, because I live in a very, very, very conservative town in the middle of California. Central California is very red. Central California is the reason why California had a recall to recall Governor Newsom to begin with. But for me, it finally came to the point where I realized that I wanted to make that leap to address what I normally addressed at in other cities at the local level. And it was at the local level that I realized that I can enact the most kind of effective change. And the regional arts program here, the Regional Arts Council, has a program called Jump Starts. And I was involved with that allows for practitioners like myself the access to go into juvenile halls, alternative high schools, and provide not just poetry workshops, but times to communicate and allow these young men and women the ability to be vulnerable. And it's very rewarding, and I won't lie, it is very, very challenging. I know the challenges that each of you educators face because, you know, we want to do our best. And it's just sometimes very difficult to engage. And a lot of the reasons why, you know, some of them were just off put, wouldn't participate, would even be hostile, is because of shortfalls on my end that I didn't see. They were probably reading at a second grade level and then we're in the 10th grade. And rather than allowing that to be visible, they would be defensive and say, this is dumb, right? Others would, you know, take full flight with it and would just find so many ways to say things that they just couldn't say. So it's also unfortunately taken a back burner since COVID, because it's not like the local jail, adult jail, where I also do workshops, and where we can do Zoom. It's more difficult with the minor population because their access to computers is a lot more limited. But yeah, I enjoy it. And it was that decision to kind of merge those two avenues of advocacy.
That's admirable, and the impact that you're having, while it may not be visible now, it will go well into their adulthood. Just the fact that you're taking that time. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
And kudos to your mom for volunteering in the literacy programs. We have to get her here to Norwalk.
Yeah, now that she has her, you know, her ID, because we're still going through her asylum application, you know, process and all that. But in the meantime, she does have a valid ID, and so we have been in the talks. It got cut off with COVID, but wherever I go, I wanted to bring her with me just so she can see the U.S. You know, yeah. So next time I'm in, I think Dana had only told me you're only about 3 hours from New York. So next time I'm in New York, I might make the drive up there.
Not even 3 hours.
Okay.
One, and depending on how you drive, it might be a half an hour. So yes, you must. Let's see. We have a couple of. So our First Lady, Lucia Rilling, says, Marcelo, your mother is an inspiration like you are. And Juliana Smith says, or Juliana Smith, thank you, Mr. Castillo. Your book is a very powerful invitation to become more empathetic leaders, to transform our community and contribute to a better future for our children. One phrase that really caught my attention was, every act of living became an act of trying to remain visible. And Georgia Mack, one of Norwalk Public School's very own wonderful teacher, she wrote, would Mr. Marcelo be willing to share his experience with some of the high school students?
I mean, yeah, briefly, last semester I was teaching high school here in my town, and it's difficult because you know, also being in a very conservative town, having a very diverse student body means that you also have parents who might not appreciate the conversations that I was having. And this like clickbait argument that has nothing to do with, you know, teaching history in school around like critical race theory. You know, critical race theory, you don't even read in like undergrad, let alone graduate school. But anyways, that's neither here nor there conversation for another time. But it was hard because it was during COVID. I taught high school before, but I went back this year because the district were in desperate need of teachers, especially since a lot of the teachers left. But within the constraints of what you, as an English teacher, be within the constraints of what you're having to teach, you know, I had to choose between, you know, teaching To Kill a Mockingbird or Lord of the Flies. Choosing to teach Lord of the Flies the supplemental materials that I taught along with that were also talking about the points around colonialism and the narratives around quote unquote savagery that that William Golding exploited, and this dichotomy that he sets up between like again quote unquote like civil young British boys losing their civility and then taking on these like savage properties. And so talking very frankly about the context and history of the book was very informative and very useful. So I can teach the curriculum, but also make addendums to that by offering YouTube videos that talked about the language that we used in Lord of the Flies that was perhaps problematic, and how he used those tropes of quote unquote savagery, and how those perpetuate stereotypes.
So I think Ms. Mack means she wants to have you come. We're going to get you to Norwalk one way or another. Via Zoom, via plane, we're going to get you here one way or another. So everyone, I really enjoyed the conversation. I've learned just as much from you on tonight's conversation as I did from the book. So I really want to thank you, Mr. Castillo, for being so down to earth and accepting our invitation. I want to thank the wonderful Dr. Alexandra Estrella for telling us that we should read this book, and for Diana Carpio for jumping on board. And she emailed me, we have a surprise for you. And you were the surprise that, yay, he's going to be a part of this discussion. So well worth it. And thank you so very much. We really appreciate you.
It is my honor, my pleasure. Thank you all so much.
And I thank the panel
Thank you.
for taking their time. And Luis, if you can just wave to everyone. Luis is my partner in Good Trouble at the Norwalk Public Library. So we'll talk about how we can get your mom over to our library system. And let's see. Oh, Sharon, one of the library board members, Sharon Benante, is with us. She said, thank you, beautiful book and program. And Shelley said, I know it's 8:30 and we will end, but if anyone wants to hang around to see, it's a brief video of the Netflix this documentary with Selena Gomez. That's how we will end. So I just want to thank everyone for coming, and please stay on if you want to see the video. Have a good night.
Thank you so much for
Good
being
night.
vulnerable and sharing your story. Being able to experience it through your eyes was mind-blowing, extremely heartbreaking. So thank you. What's happened in your lives since, participating in this documentary series?
Well, so for my brother and I, at this moment in time, we don't really feel safe in this country. We don't feel welcome, and it does seem like time is running out for us.
Our appointment with ICE, it was postponed indefinitely, so we were just kind of in this limbo. We didn't know what was going on.
My father was detained, and a week later, he was deported to Colombia.
I didn't even get to say bye to him. He just left for work like normally, and I got a call saying they got him. At that point, I think everything changed, because I never imagined in a million years that they would actually detain him, that this was something that they're only going to do to people who committed crimes, to murders, to whatever. We're not safe in our house anymore. I haven't been in my house in a month. I haven't slept in my bed. It doesn't make any sense. My dad went through hell for 8 days in these detainment centers. I think everybody at this point sort of has an idea of what's going on. They have people locked up in these cages, essentially. They sleep on the floors with these aluminum blankets. In these rooms, they have the lights on 24 hours a day. Being able to speak with him after the 8 days that he was there, I had never heard the pain that he had in his voice ever in my life. I think he will be damaged by that experience, just being there for 8 days for the rest of his life. It was an absolute hell. And, they're telling us that, they're going after us, and that, we could possibly be in this same situation. This country's, it's not livable for us anymore.
Hearing all these things really ruins your determination to stay. It really just makes you think, like, that could be me, that could be my parents, that could be my siblings. And you don't want that. What's the point in pushing so hard if all you're gonna get is that?
What do you guys think that you would be doing if you didn't have to worry about this?
I think about this every day. If this wasn't happening, I'd be going through school, just working hard to achieve what I want to achieve, which is being a civil engineer. I'd be living a normal life. I'd be living the life that my next door neighbor does. It's nothing crazy, but it's what I dream of.
We've never been able to travel anywhere outside of the country because ICE has our passports, and the only way we can get out of this country is through them deporting us.
In Israel, I have so many cousins and so many aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews, and I feel like it's come to the point where, like, I don't know if I will ever meet them, and I know a lot of my friends are best friends with their cousins, or they get to go to Israel for vacation. Like, I'm missing out on so much.
Personally, hearing all of these things that you guys are not able to enjoy about a country that I live in is very difficult. What do you guys think that you're missing out on?
The ability to simply go to school is the most important thing to me. Has been a struggle. We don't sleep at night. Just a million scenarios run through my head every day.
I got robbed last week. I was scared to call the police because I didn't know, could they track my family? Would they get in touch with my parents? Would they come to my house? Would they want to see, like, who's there? Basically don't exist.
What is your biggest fear?
To have this adrenaline every single day, to be scared every single day for the rest of my life, that nothing will ever change.
My biggest fear is being detained and going through what my dad went through. I literally had a nightmare last night about being dropped off in a country that I've never been to, really, since I was 3, that I wouldn't even know where I was standing.
With all of this fear that you guys have to live with every day, do you find that it's really hard to trust people?
I've kept it a secret. I like to represent myself as Colombian because that's what I am. But people never really assume that I don't have a status in this country. When we received news that our private bill was taken away and we were left without status, my biggest fear at the time was I was going to leave without anyone knowing what happened to me. So I made a crazy decision to just tell my friend Brian. He was someone that was very open to it and made me feel very comfortable talking to someone. And if it wasn't for that conversation, I don't think I would have ever spoken to someone about it. So yeah, it makes me cry just because of how special that moment was. And we got really close because of it, but it was definitely hard at the time. I want people to know about my situation. I need people to know about my situation, and yeah, so yeah. You're good, thank you.
You really got me going here. When it came to high school, it would bring up a lot of questions. Everyone would always ask, why don't you have your license? Why don't you have a car? Why do you keep moving houses? If a question came up between a close friend and I wouldn't hide it from them because I feel like, yes, it is hard to find people you trust, but it depends on, like, how long you've known them or what their situation is, what their beliefs are.
Do you feel American? You know, like, how would you describe that feeling?
I feel like you couldn't get any more American than us four in this table right now.
I feel like I am an American. I've lived here my whole life. I was 6 months old when I moved. I don't know anything but here. I don't want anyone to have to fear the place that they grew up in. I don't want anyone to experience that, and I just want America as a whole to know and understand what's really happening when these people are getting deported. They don't just get a plane ticket and say, like, bye, like, go back to your old life. We don't have an old life anymore. This is what we have.
Yeah, I don't know what else I would be considered. I have Colombian family who would, tease me. They see me as American. I speak English. My Spanish isn't, the strongest. I've lived here since I was 3. It's my whole life.
What you see on the news is not really what's happening. They're trying to label me as a criminal. They're trying to just label people as much as possible. We're not a threat to society. We're simply just being looked at differently and portrayed as an enemy.
There's millions of us here, and you don't hear about, I would say 99% of them, simply because these are people who just come here looking for a better life, and they're working and they're minding their own business.
I feel like we've been given this stereotype that immigrants have come here to sell drugs, to rob, to hurt, to steal, to do all these terrible things, when in reality, we've come here to live a safer life. And instead of looking at us as people who want to take from you, look at us as people who want to be with you. We want to be able to work together.
I really hope that the fight doesn't end with us leaving. I hope that the fight continues to the point where this country welcomes us with open arms and sees us for who we really are. We really just want to make sure the story is known, and at the end of the day, that's all that really matters to me, is that this doesn't happen to other families.
I hope for my family to one day live in a place where we're completely accepted and we don't feel constant fear. And I hope that this country comes to realize the just complete injustice that's being done, and that one day we can just live in America that is open to immigrants and lives up to its values of freedom and liberty.
You guys have given me hope. There are beautiful people in this world that do want this country to change and to improve and seek logic in the situation.
What do you hope for the future of America? For us.
Well, a huge part of why I wanted to be a part of this is to also be a voice for so many people who can't and are terrified to speak about it. I don't even think people realize that my family also has a background. My grandparents were immigrants. And to just think about the life that I've been given and how blessed I am. My hope is that I see change.
We're all in this together.
Doesn't end here.
I just think you are wonderful people. And I want you to stay.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who stayed to watch. That was very enlightening for me. So I hope this discussion won't end here, that we'll empathize and take what we've learned, and just try to help others live the life that they want to live. So with that, I'll say good night and thank you all again.
Thank you, Sherelle. Thank you.
First
very
Lady,
much.
did you want to take us out? You want to say a few words?
Take us out? No, I never want to take you out.
My vernacular, sorry.
I want to take you in.
My vernacular.
Yeah, well, what can I say? This was so informative, so reflective, so illuminating, educational, thought-provoking. I mean, I can go on and on. I think that this is a big deal, obviously. Most of us who tuned in tonight understand, know, or want to know more. As I always say, I'm here to help advocate towards what is right, what is good, what is just, and I'm here to help anyone who needs my help, my input, to reach a larger audience, to educate one another. Empathy, I think, is huge, and ironically, I believe, and maybe I speak for myself, but I doubt. Empathy is something that a lot of families whether they're documented or undocumented, teach a lot of children at an early age how to practice that, how to live it, how to live by it. And it's something that's really important. A lot of children, even at a young age, myself, my family, always told us their stories, their hardships. And through that, as the years go by, I'm not going to say that I feel or that I have felt a guilt towards that, given the privileges that I've had, starting with being born here. But yeah, there is a lot of empathy in our own culture, in the Hispanic culture. And as I'm accustomed to dealing with all various cultures, I see that a lot more, and I hear it spoken of a lot more, which is a wonderful thing. But more education is key for all of us, So Sherelle and everyone else, thank you so very much for being here tonight. I can't say much more except thank you once again. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.